the first thing I want you to know about your journey or our journeys is they must include being poured into. Our journey must include being poured out as well as being poured into. Jesus is our example. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You're on verse 7, or read it on the board when it comes up here in just a little bit. This morning, I just want to take a few minutes and talk about our faith journeys. When my wife and I started attending church, we were what I would call barn fresh. You've heard of barn fresh things. They come and they've sat a long time, or they've gone through a lot of difficulty, and they're in a place to be restored. I get chainsaws that way a lot, and I fix them up. So my wife and I were barn fresh. We had gone through some pretty difficult things, had quite a time, and we wanted a different life. So we thought we would give church a try. And we got involved in a church in Lewiston, Warner Avenue Alliance. And when the pastor preached on Sunday mornings, it felt like he was talking directly to me and my wife. The things he was preaching about were totally speaking about the struggles that we had been going through. And so it was a very healing time, a time of significant growth, and a time of significant renewal. And then I had a coworker a few years prior say to me, "Hey, Bill, if you ever have an opportunity to go to Promise Keepers, I recommend you go." And so the church we were attending started organizing a group of men to go to Promise Keepers. And so I'm like, "Hey, I've heard about them. I heard that's a good thing. That might be the next thing I need to do in my spiritual growth." And so I signed up for Promise Keepers, and it was a phenomenal weekend down in Boise. And I really felt God get a hold of my life at Promise Keepers. And from that trip to Boise for Promise Keepers, we launched a men's Bible study, a men's Wednesday morning men's Bible study. Sound familiar? Except Thursday here. And I got involved in that, and I never missed. I almost never missed. And we met year-round every Wednesday. There was rarely a Wednesday where we didn't meet. And in that group, I was like a sponge. I mean, the guys that had been seasoned Christians were sharing about their lives, and I was just soaking up everything those guys were talking about. And then we would study the Bible together, and I would just soak all of that up. In fact, back then I'd like to think of myself as like a baby bird, just standing there with my mouth open saying, "Feed me, feed me." I keep putting a towel up here that I want to use for an illustration, and it keeps disappearing. Has anybody seen a folded towel with red stripes on it? If you see one, throw it to me. Anyway, I wanted to learn as much about God and grow in my relationship with God. In fact, I was, like I said, I was kind of like a baby bird. However, as time went on, I started thinking that maybe there should be more to church than just going to men's group and attending Sunday morning and listening to good sermons and that type of thing. And so we started looking for ways to invest back into the church, ways to serve. We started serving in children's ministry, started getting connected in those ways. And as time went on, I got more and more involved in church, if that's any surprise to you all. I think we all have a similar journey in our lives. Now, some of us aren't as far down the journey. Some of our journeys are a little bit different, because I don't imagine all of you are called to be pastors, maybe just one or two of you. But we're all called to something by God. And so we all have a similar story of starting out just really kind of being hungry for God, and then a time in our lives when we begin to want to reinvest or pour back into the church using our giftedness. The Apostle Paul had a similar journey. And I want to take a quick look at that. So I want to take a quick snippet out of Acts chapter 9, where the Apostle Paul has his first encounter with Jesus. Now, if you remember, the Apostle Paul was a Pharisee, and he was persecuting the church. He was on his way to Damascus with letters from the chief priests giving him permission to arrest as many Christians as possible, because he was against God, he was against the church, he was against Jesus. And he had an encounter with Jesus, and basically Jesus just showed up along the road. A bright light shined, and Jesus spoke directly to him. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Saul's like, Paul, Saul, same guy, says like, "Well, who is this?" And Jesus is like, "It's me, Jesus, whom you are persecuting." And that caused Saul to have a significant change of heart about the church. And Jesus then told him to get up, and to go to Damascus, to not have anything to eat or drink, and wait. And when he got up, he was blind. Okay, and so this is what it says, starting with verse 7. Acts 9, verse 7 through 10. This is what it says. "The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing." Now I want you to note this. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. And in Damascus, there's another person. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a vision, "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. So there's some things going on in this little section of scripture that I want to point out. And the first thing is that after Paul's first encounter with Jesus, he was helpless. Saul was helpless and needed others. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. Paul needed other people to help him. Friends, I want to tell you something this morning. If you're coming to church and you're new, and there's things that you don't know and things that you don't understand, it's okay to ask. Don't feel like because you're an adult and you've been a Christian for just a little while that somehow you had to know everything. We have to have somebody pour into us to help us learn and grow. But I've noticed sometimes, especially adults that get involved in church will be ashamed that maybe they don't already know everything. You don't all of a sudden become a Bible scholar because you prayed a prayer. There's discipleship that has to go on to help us grow. And even Saul, even the Apostle Paul needed someone to help him, someone to lead him. He needed to be led, and he needed to be poured into. He was a new Christian. As a new Christian, we need help from other Christians. We need them to show us how to use our Bibles, how to pray, and how to share all of the wonderful things about God. A new Christian is often like a sponge soaking up as much as possible, and it's a beautiful thing if that's you. You're just here, you've been a Christian just a little while, and you're just soaking it up, and it's just renewing and refreshing you every time you come to church or go to your group. Saul needed someone to pour into him, okay? This is where Ananias comes in. That's where Ananias comes in. God called Ananias to a specific task, and that was to pour into Paul. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a vision. Ananias, yes, Lord, he answered. Now, here's the thing I want you to know. Ananias was a little bit reluctant. He'd heard about Saul. He'd heard about Saul's intentions of persecuting the church. So Saul needed someone to take a risk on him, to step out in faith and pour into Saul. That means Ananias was stepping out in faith and pouring himself into Saul. He was making a sacrifice. He was taking a risk. And there was no guarantees other than that God had called him to do it. That was his guarantee. It was important for Paul to be poured into so he could eventually pour into others. And then when we read Acts, it seems like 15 minutes later, Paul was out preaching. There's probably a little more time in that. However, Saul did have a foundation of a Pharisee, being a scholar of the Old Testament. So he had something that most of us don't have when we get saved. But then we see where Ananias came after Ananias having some conversations with God about Saul. We see where he came and he laid hands on Saul and prayed for him. And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes and he could see again. He got up and was baptized. And after taking some food, he regained his strength. He grew. And here's the thing. He grew in strength, in an ability to go and fulfill what God had called him to do, in which case he began to pour himself out into others for the sake of the kingdom. Okay, that was Paul's journey, and our journey is a lot like Paul's. Here's the thing, the first thing I want you to know about your journey or our journeys is they must include being poured into. We need to be poured into. We need someone to pour into us. When we are being poured into, we grow. Often, like a new believer comes to church where if I had my towel that I can't find, I would put it around my neck like a bib, right? A new believer often comes into the church just needing to be fed, needing to hear the gospel, needing to be poured into by other believers, and that's you. If that's you, that's okay. It's okay if you right now in your stage of your journey have nothing to give or nothing to offer, because there are others here who have everything to give to pour into you. Okay? A new believer is hungry for God. I've noticed though that there's a point in a person's journey where they will stop growing if they're just being poured into. They'll stop growing if they're just going to church or just attending their small group or their different Bible studies. And often I know they're at that point in their journey because I will hear this from them. Pastor, you seem to preach about the same things over and over and over again. You're kind of redundant, I think. And I've been listening to this other guy online, and he speaks about other stuff. This Bible study that we're doing right now is not feeding me, or my favorite one, the one I love to hear. It brings me such joy. I'm not being fed. This condition is a condition or a sign that reveals that there needs to be a change in the direction of one's growth. And that is a sign that they need to be in a position to pour out into someone else. You see, because our journey must include being poured out as well as being poured into. Okay? And so if I had my towel, I would now put it around my waist like an apron. But my towel is gone, so we will just pretend that I have an apron around my waist. See, I want you to note something about Ananias. He didn't go because he wanted to. He went because God called him to. Oftentimes, there is a feeling of discontentment that people will feel when God is calling them to something. And if we can choose to ignore it, and that's where the discontentment, where the kind of like, comes. But if we begin to embrace it and seek God and what He's calling us to, He's likely to open the doors for you to find a place where you can be poured out. Jesus is our example. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. Now, here's the thing. I know, and when I was involved in my previous church, when I started looking for ways to serve, I said, hey, I would like to help in children's ministry. A month later, I was in charge of children's ministry. As a pastor here, I will make every effort to make sure that never happens to you, unless you want to, and then I will watch you and catch you when you fall. Now, here's the thing: is when I did that, I never saw the inside of the sanctuary for a year. I just served in children's ministry. And I began to get very empty because I wasn't being poured into, I was only pouring out. So it's important that when we pour out, that we are also being poured into. But here's the thing. This is what I've learned. There's a fear that if we begin to pour out, we won't be poured into. But I've learned that often when we pour out, the Holy Spirit has a way of pouring more in because we make room for more. We gain more challenge and we step out in faith. So our faith grows as well. We become more like Jesus when we pour out and we answer His call and begin to see Him not only work in our own lives, but in the lives of others. I'm getting there. I'm almost done. Okay. The key to this is, guys, is when we pour into one another. The men's group that I was in, I had opportunities to pray for and to pour into the lives of other men, while other men were pouring into my life. That's called Christian community. And we need to seek that. We need to seek ways where we can be poured into while pouring into others. Because when we do that, we have greater growth. We are stronger together when we begin to pour into one another's lives as we're pouring into others' lives. Because that equals greater growth. Hopefully you guys noticed when you came in, Mandy got our vision boards done. The vision boards reflect the vision of New Ground, and that is the in, up, and out thing. But I want to note, if you see on the board, there's our vision. And it says this, the very first word is what? Together. Why do we do it together? Because when we do it together, we pour into each other. So no one is getting drained, but we're pouring into each other as we're going and doing our vision. Together, we engage people by helping them step into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Together, while pouring into each other, we are pouring ourselves into our community, wanting them to know Jesus. We want people to step into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then we want to continue to pour into them, raising them up to be who God created them to be. But we don't stop there. You see, we don't care about the seating capacity of our church. We care about the sending capacity of our church. Like Antioch, we want to be a church that sends people back into the community to fulfill our vision, because we want to send them out to change their world. We want to send them into the community where they work, where they go to school, where they interact, to change their world, to bring the gospel into that situation, to be the salt of the earth. That's who we are. That's what we want to do. That's where, hopefully you can kind of see where you are in your journey. If you're just needing people to pour into you, that's okay. If you're looking for a place to pour out, well, good thing you're here today. If you're looking for a place to be poured into, it's a good thing you're here today, because we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about ways that you can pour out and ways that you can be poured into. Because today we're hoping to catalyze this work by presenting to you all the ways you can be poured into and ways you can pour out into others. There's not something, I do want to say something, if there's not something that fits your schedule or kind of where you are in life, I would love to sit down with you and talk about ways that we could start something new. So this is what I'd like for you to do. I'd like for you to sit back and relax and consider what God might be calling you to do as we share with you the different things that we have here as a church.